Now, maybe I'm not giving Pippin enough credit, but I really do think it's Eru affecting things. We've never seen any hint of Pippin being particularly prescient or have any sort of gift of prophecy or foresight, but here he gets a vision of Strider following their trail. Why else would he see that if it's not an outside force affecting him? Not to mention the wording here as Pippin goes off the trail. A thought leaped into his mind. If that's not supernatural, honestly, I don't know what is. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Auda and Sulliva, where we are walking our way through Tolkien's Legendarium, looking for new insights to the books that we all love. Today, we are in part 2 of chapter 3 of book 3, the Uruk-Hai. As we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, grab a version of the books you don't have in the description below, or join the channel membership community if you would like to support the channel that way. We also partner, of course, with Chapters Tea and Coffee. Chapters springs from a passion for story. They set out to elevate the stories we all love by teaming up with independent artists to hand draw beautiful imagery and pair it with specially selected artisanal tea. My favorite is Second Breakfast, of course. Go to drinkchapters.com/Huron and use the code Huron15 to get 15% off. I do earn a small commission for every bag sold, so thank you in advance. It's a great way to sit down and enjoy the books we all love. That's drinkchapters.com/Huron and use code Huron15 to get 15% off. All right, let's dive in. We left off last video with Pippin being the calmest he's ever been. He took advantage of the situation and is biding his time until he has his next opportunity. Things are looking up, and we're reminded he is in an absolute nightmare. An orc seized Pippin like a sack, put its head between his tied hands, grabbed his arms and dragged them down until Pippin's face was crushed against its neck. Then it jolted off with him. Another treated Merry in the same way. The orc's claw-like hand gripped Pippin's arms like iron. The nails bit into him. He shut his eyes and slipped back into evil dreams. Tolkien brings us back to the beginning of the chapter where Pippin was dreaming he was in dark tunnels with orcs clawing and laughing at him. It really gives me the feeling of kind of like just this fever dream, just kind of passing out from exhaustion eventually, having the weirdest and sometimes like these scary dreams. This makes me think Tolkien was possibly, I would probably say subconsciously remembering his time in World War I when he had trench fever. I'm totally going to project here, but I think it was something he almost blacked out and didn't think about consciously, but it was buried, so deep in the memory. If called upon, could be so sharp, it just kind of bubbled to the surface here. Maybe he even exercised that memory at this moment, when he finally wrote the story of Numenor. His reoccurring dream of the giant wave crashing on the green field was gone. I have no evidence for this at all. It's complete conjecture, but I don't know, that sounds interesting. Woken up from his evil dreams by being unceremoniously dumped on the ground, Pippin then overhears a short conversation that seems pretentious for a group of orcs. "The scouts have come back at last," said an orc close at hand. "Well, what did you discover?" growled the voice of Uruk. "Only a single horseman, and he made off westwards? All's clear now." "Now, I dare say, but how long? You fools! You should have shot him. He'll raise the alarm. The cursed horse breeders will hear of us by morning. Now we'll have to leg it double quick." At first glance, it seems like good news. Just one horseman. He can't be that much trouble. But Uruk understands the issue much better than the orc he just spoke with. One rider will bring more riders, 120 to be precise. We know this because Legolas tells us he sees 105 horsemen riding towards him in the plains, and once the hunters reached the place of the battle and the burning of the orc bodies, they found a mound of turfs of grass with 15 spears planted around it, so 120 riders. We don't know exactly how many orcs there are, but I feel like there may be about that many, if not a bit less, which we'll actually discover this in the next video, how many there were, or closer. Uruk's big concern is probably the fact that they're on foot on open plains. Mounted cavalry is pretty hard to beat, probably even for a large Uruk-Hai, so he's right to be worried about more riders coming to find them. And because he knows they need to keep moving, he understands the importance of his company of orcs being able to keep moving. And the best way for them to keep moving is not to have to carry their prisoners. He cut the thongs around Pippin's legs and ankles, picked him up by his hair, and stood him on his feet. Pippin fell down, and Uruk dragged him up by his hair again. Several orcs laughed. Uruk thrust a flask between his teeth and poured some burning liquor down his throat. He felt a hot, fierce glow flow through him. The pain in his legs and ankles vanished. He could stand. Pippin saw him go to Merry, who was lying close by, and kick him. Merry groaned. Seizing him roughly, Uruk pulled him into a sitting position and tore the bandage off his head. Then he smeared the wound with some dark stuff out of a small wooden box. Merry cried out and struggled wildly. But at the moment, Uruk was not engaged in sport. He needed speed and had to humor unwilling followers. He was healing Merry in orc fashion, and his treatment worked swiftly. When he had forced a drink from his flask down the hobbit's throat, cut his leg bonds and dragged him to his feet, Merry stood up, looking pale but grim and defiant, and very much alive. The gash in his forehead gave him no more trouble, but he bore a brown scar to the end of his days. Now, the medicine given to Pippin at first seems to be a type of alcohol. They said liquor, what with the burning going down the throat and all. I did a little research and it seems there's actually quite a lot of evidence for alcohol being used as medicine, or at least medicinal, back in the day. I'm sure many people remember the image of Saint Bernard dog with a brandy barrel hanging around their neck for people trapped in avalanches. One study I looked over states alcohol reduced delirium. I'm sure they're referring to a small amount, not the relatively large quantities I saw the fraternities imbibing while in college. This is obviously not gospel on how alcohol was treated, but it is just kind of something I found, kind of file that in your brain head. This whole idea of being healed orc-fashion is interesting to me also. Let's compare it to Aragorn's healing and kind of a little bit of Gandalf's. After the horror of the Watcher in the water, Gandalf gives each member of the company a mouthful of Mirivor, the cordial of Imladris. It doesn't burn going down the throat, but it's said to be a liquor. Okay, so that's not too different from the orc draught. Orc draught is just maybe less refined, we should say. Not quite as smooth. But what about the orcish neosporin they use on the gash of Merry's forehead? It's some type of topical ointment being used. Now, we don't know all the ingredients being used in it, but it seems to me there would have to at least be a couple. Anytime you have a mixture like that or ointment or something, there's more than a couple ingredients. And the way everything is described is really rough. The dark stuff was smeared, forced to drink. It's all rough and violent sort of healing. Compare that to how Aragorn heals people in the House of Healing and on Weathertop. He finds a single ingredient, Ethelos, breaks it into water and bathes the wound with water. A single pure ingredient. He does put it on the moon as well, but kind of the language around the whole experience is very, very different. Now we look at the effects of the healing too. The orc ointment causes Merry to cry out, struggle wildly. The orcs even say he can't hold his medicine. So obviously it's not a comfortable thing. On the other hand, at Weathertop, the steam refreshes Frodo and his pain just simply lessens. We can also see Aragorn sing over the Morgul blade on Weathertop, quietly struggle at Faramir's side, softly call out to Éowyn, and simply just call Merry's name. There's very little physical action. It's about the power inherent in Aragorn, passed down to him from Eärendil, descendant of a Maya and an elf king who saw the trees. Tolkien also makes sure to note the ointment left a brown scar on Merry's forehead. I searched the word scar in the ebook and it only shows up 5 times in the book, and this is the only time it was in reference to a person. We don't even hear whether Frodo bears a scar from getting stabbed on Weathertop or not, so we could infer that Aragorn's healing is more efficacious than orc medicine. Part of my reasoning as it seems to be more spiritual healing and the orc medicine is more physical. And I do have a theory as to why. The theory brings us back to the last video where we talk about the origin of the orcs and their redeemability. Check it out over here. With the most of the changes of the origins of orc coming after the writing of the Lord of the Rings, we can probably move forward assuming Tolkien used the origins of orcs as elves corrupted by Morgoth while he was actually writing this. But because they are so corrupted, their innate magic, like what we talked about with the elven cloaks just being imbibed with the essence of the world around it because the elves love it, doesn't work the way it should. They have lost their magical powers. They have adapted to using crude tricks of liquor that burns on the way down and ointments that cause great pain. Their magic is as corrupted as they have been. Obviously, again, it's just a theory, but I don't know, for me it fits. Now, right afterwards, we get a reunion of a sort of the 2 hobbits. "Hello, Pippin," he said, "so you've come on this little expedition too. Where do we get bed and breakfast?" Just another bit of light hobbitry. This is a continual thing in the book. Though once the company splits, we mostly see it with Merry and Pippin. It's a lightheartedness that really makes you think twice about how silly the young hobbits are. And it brings back to mind the prologue of the book. Thank you, Corey Olsen, for reminding me of this in exploring Lord of the Rings. Nonetheless, ease and peace had left this people still curiously tough. They were, if it came to it, difficult to daunt or to kill, and they were perhaps so unwearyingly fond of good things, not least because they could, when put to it, do without them, and could survive rough handling by grief, foe, or weather in a way that astonished those who did not know them well and looked no further than their bellies and their well-fed faces. He's really preparing us in the prologue for this sort of thing. If we read the prologue carefully and really pay attention to all the hobbitry beforehand, this really shouldn't surprise us. Though the mention of a bed and breakfast might be a little surprising since I doubt that was a thing, in Middle-earth. But Tolkien did mix some of this type of thing in from time to time. Locomotives, that kind of thing. With the Rohirrim likely coming back and the orcs tired of carrying the hobbits around, they have to run with the orcs now. And here we have another moment of what I call fate stepping in and nudging the whole quest in the right direction. Every now and again there came into his mind, unbidden, a vision of the keen face of Strider bending over a dark trail and running behind. But what could even a ranger see except a confused trail of orc feet? His own little prince and Merry's were overwhelmed by the trampling of the iron-shod shoes before them and behind them and about them. A sudden thought leaped into Pippin's mind, and he acted on it at once. He swerved aside to the right and dived out of the reach of his clutching guard, headfirst into the mist. He landed sprawling on the grass. "Halt!" yelled Uruk. There was for a moment turmoil and confusion. Pippin sprang up and ran, but the orcs were after him. Some suddenly loomed up right in front of him. No hope of escape, thought Pippin. But there is a hope that I have left some of my own marks unspoiled on the wet ground. He groped with his two tied hands at his throat and unclasped the brooch of his cloak. Just as long arms and hard claws seized him, he let it fall. There, I suppose it will lie until the end of time, he thought. I don't know why I did it. If the others have escaped, they've probably all gone with Frodo. Now, maybe I'm not giving Pippin enough credit, but I really do think it's Eru affecting things. We've never seen any hint of Pippin being particularly prescient or have any sort of gift of prophecy or foresight, but here he gets a vision of Strider following their trail. Why else would he see that if it's not an outside force affecting him? Not to mention the wording here as Pippin goes off the trail. A thought leaped into his mind. If that's not supernatural, honestly, I don't know what is. And what's cool is we see some of the interlacing Tolkien does really meld together for a moment in this section. We already know from the previous chapter that Aragorn finds a Lorien brooch on the ground after following a trail of smaller feet he thinks are Pippin's. And here we see exactly what happened and how it happened. Pippin just veered off in his smartest moment of the entire book. And in continuation of last week, this is part of the best sequence of events Pippin takes part in. Sure, I may not be giving him full credit for the ideas leading up to all of this, but he still has free will. He was provided the opportunity and he could have chosen not to take it. But he took it, and just as Aragorn feared, Uruk promises he will pay for his boldness. Luckily, the orcs still didn't want to carry him, so they just keep him running instead of making him pay immediately. Neither Pippin nor Merry remembered much of the later part of the journey. Evil dreams and evil waking were blended into a long tunnel of misery, with hope growing ever fainter behind. They ran and they ran, striving to keep up the pace set by the orcs, licked every now and again with the cruel thong cunningly handled. If they halted or stumbled, they were seized and dragged for some distance. The warmth of the orc draught had gone. Pippin felt cold and sick again. Suddenly he fell face downward on the turf. Hard hands with rending nails gripped and lifted him. He was carried like a sack once more, and darkness grew about him. Whether the darkness of another night or blindness of his eyes, he could not tell. Okay, so maybe not that luckily. While Merry and Pippin clearly survived the journey, it sounds like it was pretty terrible, to put it lightly. They were whipped and eventually carried when their legs failed them. I haven't done a lot of research into forced marches or anything, but other than the fact that this is clearly a forced march, the experience that Tolkien gives us really feels like what that experience would be. They don't remember much of it. It kind of just passed in misery, essentially blacking out from exhaustion, being dragged and carried. I mean, I did cross country for one season in high school, and even a couple of those races felt like that. I'm not comparing me running a 5K to a forced march. I'm just saying if 5K was bad enough, I can't imagine how terrible something like this would be. Their walk through the wilderness continues, and we eventually see Uruk yelling at orcs wanting to leave the group. They're clearly worried about the Rohirrim coming to them before they reach the relative safety of the forest. Cavalry isn't going to be super effective there, but it's also a reminder for us that the orcs seriously erred before when letting the scout go. There was some cursing and scuffling, and then most of the northerners broke away and dashed off, over 100 of them, running wildly along the river towards the mountains. The hobbits were left with the Isengarders, a grim, dark band, 80 at least of large, sword, slant-eyed orcs with great bows and short, broad-bladed swords. A few of the larger and bolder northerners remained with them. Now we'll deal with Grishnákh, said Uruk. But some even of his own followers were looking uneasily southwards. I know, growled Uruk. The cursed horse boys have got wind of us, but that's all your fault, Snaga. You and the other scouts ought to have your ears cut off. But we are the fighters. We'll feast on horse flesh yet, or something better. Northerners' reminder are Moria orcs, and just for a second, remember that it's most likely Pippin's point of view that we're seeing here. And aside from him telling the story about how the orcs are worried about the Rohirrim, even the Uruk-Hai, it's a little glimpse of positive foreshadowing for us, at least For me, I know I can get really absorbed into a good book, which this is. So it would be easy for me to forget what we heard in the last chapter about the Rohirrim killing all the orcs. So we're being reminded that the riders, at least the group we met last chapter, are stronger than the orcs as a whole. Even though we don't technically know Merry and Pippin will be fine, we start to see the despair starting to crack around Pippin because of what he's seeing. The orcs are scared. But where hope may start to show, it can get crushed just as easily. At that moment, Pippin saw why some of the troop had been pointing eastward. From that direction, there now came hoarse cries, and there was Grishnákh again, and at his back a couple of score of others like him, long-armed, crooked-legged orcs. They had a red eye painted on their shields. Uruk stepped forward to meet them. "So you've come back," he said. "Thought better of it, eh?" "I've returned to see that orders are carried out and the prisoners are safe," answered Grishnákh. "Indeed," said Uruk, "waste of effort. I'll see that orders are carried out in my command. And what else did you come back for? You went in a hurry. Did you leave anything behind?" "I left a fool," snarled Grishnákh. "But there were some stout fellows with him that are too good to lose. I knew you'd lead them into a mess. I've come to help them." So the Uruk-Hai's numbers are bolstered by the return of the Mordor orcs. Tolkien reinforces this by bringing attention to the red eye on their shield. Obviously the great eye we've heard Grishnákh reference before, Sauron. We also see the hatred between Uruk and Grishnákh continue, furthering the idea that orcs just can't get along. Maybe they can give us, like readers, a little bit of hope, a house divided and all that. Now, Grishnákh lets slip that the Nazgul aren't allowed to be seen across the river yet. At least the winged Nazgul aren't allowed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the whole issue at Weathertop. And this is really the first time we're hearing about the winged Nazgul, at least officially. If you remember all the way back in the Fellowship, Legolas shoots down a giant winged creature that seemed to project terror before it. Of course, now we know this must have been the winged Nazgul. Whole new terror for the rest of the book that we have to keep in mind when wondering how our heroes will get past each new hurdle in their way. But now we know from Grishnákh they can't pass the river yet, which is lucky for Merry and Pippin and, the entirety of Middle-earth, because it's not the right time and they're being saved for the war. Now, before we wrap up this video, we see Uruk here get the last word. "You seem to know a lot," said Uruk. "More than is good for you, I guess. Perhaps those in Lugburs might wonder how and why. But in the meantime, the Uruk-Hai of Isengard can do the dirty work as usual. Don't stand slavering there. Get your rabble together. The other swine are legging it to the forest. You'd better follow. You wouldn't get back to the Great River alive. Right off the mark. Now, I'll be on your heels." Grishnákh does seem to know a little more than you would think. Perhaps it's just a plot device Tolkien is using. Why would Grishnákh know that? Did the Nazgul tell him? I can't imagine the Nazgul giving him orders saying we would do it ourselves, but we can't cross the river yet. But even then, it seems a little weird. Sauron, and by proxy the Nazgul, don't seem to be the type of people, I guess you could say, who really explain anything to their underlings. But Uruk is still clearly the leader of this excursion, and we see that not only will he be paying attention to our Hobbit friends, but he'll be right there making sure Grishnákh and his group aren't slowing them down in any way. And that is where we will end for today. Next week, we'll see what other trouble the orcs get themselves into. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, buy a new version of the book you don't already have in the description, or join the channel membership. And don't forget to claim your 15% off Chapters Tea and Coffee. The book and these videos are best enjoyed with a lovely beverage on hand. And until next time, always remember, Aude and Tulva, day shall come again.